In 1991, a 28-year-old could buy their first home. Today, that same 28-year-old has to wait until they're 40, and 3 out of 4 American households can't afford one at all. In 18 minutes, you'll see how the most powerful financial institution on earth, the Federal Reserve, spent 25 years turning shelter, a basic human need, into a $55 trillion speculative asset, and why nobody can stop it. If you're under 35, you're not imagining it. The system was redesigned, deliberately, to transfer your wealth to the people who already own homes. This is the story of the biggest heist in American history, and you're the one being robbed. To understand how we got here, you need to start with a number. The median new home in America costs $405,300. The median household income? $104,200. You need roughly $107,000 a year just to afford a mortgage, which means the average American family is already priced out. But it gets worse. 22.6 million renters are now cost-burdened, spending more than 30% of their income on rent. That's an all-time record. 12.1 million are spending more than half. And for the poorest, 83% of those earning under $30,000, they've got $250 a month left after housing, for food, for transport, for everything. Meet Jonathan Ochart. He's 32, moved to LA thinking he could buy a condo for $450,000. Monthly mortgage at today's rates? $3,500 to $4,000. He gave up. Now he rents for $2,100. A single professional in a major American city, and he can't make the math work. But here's the thing. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when the American dream actually worked, and to understand how it broke, you need to see who built it and who it was built for. 1944. The GI Bill passes. Low-interest loans, no down payment for returning veterans. Homeownership jumps from 44% to 62% in 16 years. William Levitt builds Levittown, mass-produced suburban houses for $7,000. That's $29 a month. The price-to-income ratio? Just 2.1 times. The white picket fence wasn't a fantasy, it was a financial reality. But, and this is the part they leave out, Levittown was whites only. By contract. Clause 25. No dwelling shall be used or occupied by members of other than the Caucasian race. The VA co-signed with private banks who could refuse black veterans freely. In New York and New Jersey, 67,000 GI Bill home purchases. Only 100 went to non-white families. Mississippi, 1947, 3,229 VA loans. 2 went to black buyers. Men like Medgar Evers, World War II veteran, Bronze Star, served in Normandy, came home and was turned away from a mortgage. Not because of his credit, because of the color of his skin. The government's own maps graded black neighborhoods hazardous. 74% of those neighborhoods are still low to moderate income today. The greatest wealth-building machine in American history was whites only. Today, median white family wealth, $285,000. Black family, $44,890. White Americans hold 83.5% of total U.S. wealth. Black Americans hold 3.4%. Then Nixon takes the dollar off gold. August 15, 1971. Inflation explodes. 13.3% by 1979. Americans pile into real estate. Home prices surge 175% in a decade, from $27,000 to $74,200. This is the moment. This is when housing stops being shelter and starts being a financial asset, the seed of everything that follows. For 2 decades, homes got expensive, but so did everything else. The real damage started when one man decided to make borrowing almost free, and then told millions of Americans to take the most dangerous mortgage on the market. On February 23, 2004, Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan stood before the Credit Union National Association and told ordinary Americans to stop taking safe, fixed-rate mortgages. His exact words, American consumers might benefit if lenders provided greater mortgage product alternatives to the traditional fixed-rate mortgage. Translation: take adjustable-rate mortgages, pegged to the federal funds rate, which was sitting at 1%, the lowest in 45 years. 4 months later, he started raising rates. What happened next was the most predictable financial disaster in American history, and the Federal Reserve made sure the people who caused it never paid the price. After Greenspan's speech, adjustable-rate mortgages exploded, from normal levels to roughly 50% of all new mortgage originations by 2005. Option arms and exotic loans went from 7% of the market to 29%, and then came the hikes. 17 consecutive rate increases from June 2004 to June 2006, from 1% all the way to 5.25%. Take someone like Maria Chen, 29 years old, San Jose. She followed the Fed chairman's advice in 2005, took an ARM at a historically low rate. By 2007, her monthly payments had nearly doubled. She did everything right. She listened to the most powerful economist in the world. By 2009, she lost the house. Maria was one of millions. By October 2007, 16% of subprime adjustable-rate mortgages were 90 days delinquent or in foreclosure, triple the rate from just 2 years earlier. And Wall Street? They'd learned something from every crisis before. The Greenspan put: every time the market crashed, whether it was 1987, 1998, or 2001, Greenspan cut rates and bailed them out. Moral hazard wasn't a bug, it was a feature. The Case-Shiller Index peaked in July 2006 at 206. By early 2012, it had collapsed to 114, a 27.4% national decline. Nearly 4 million foreclosures, 2.8 million filings in 2009 alone. By September 2009, 14.4% of every mortgage in America was delinquent or in foreclosure. $4.2 trillion in housing wealth, gone. Median household wealth fell 35%, from $106,591 to $68,839. And then came the reckoning. October 2008, Greenspan sits before Congress. His admission: I made a mistake in presuming that financial firms could self-regulate. Time magazine named him one of the 25 people to blame for the financial crisis. Let that sink in. The chairman of the Federal Reserve told Americans to take dangerous mortgages, raised rates 17 times, watched the system collapse, and then said, "Oops." Now, the crash should have corrected housing prices. The bubble should have deflated. Homes should have become affordable again. Instead, the Fed launched the most aggressive intervention in its history. The first round, November 2008. $1.25 trillion in mortgage-backed securities purchased. The Federal Reserve was literally buying mortgages to keep prices from falling further. The second round, another $600 billion. And the third, $40 billion a month in mortgage-backed securities, plus $45 billion a month in treasuries, open-ended, no expiration date. The Fed's balance sheet went from roughly $900 billion to $4.5 trillion by 2014. And here's what matters. This wasn't a side effect. Propping up home prices was the stated policy goal. Ben Bernanke, Fed chair from 2006 to 2014, oversaw a mortgage-backed securities portfolio that went from zero to nearly $1.8 trillion. And while the Fed was propping up prices, the predators moved in. Spring 2012. While 4 million American families were losing their homes to foreclosure, Stephen Schwarzman's Blackstone swooped in. They bought 1,000 distressed houses in Phoenix alone, forming Invitation Homes. They targeted strike zones, neighborhoods near jobs and schools, hammered by foreclosure. The families who lost their homes? Let me say that again. The families who lost their homes now pay rent to the company that bought their foreclosed houses at auction prices. That's not a recovery. That's a business model. On streets like Tammy Sue Lane in Tennessee, a majority of homes are now owned by Progress Residential. Former homeowner neighborhoods turned into corporate rental communities. The crash was supposed to be the correction. Instead, the Fed doubled down. But what happened next, during COVID, made everything before look like a warm-up. In March 2020, Jerome Powell did something even Bernanke never attempted. He announced unlimited mortgage-backed security purchases. No cap, no limit. The Federal Reserve would buy as many mortgages as it took. The Fed's MBS holdings doubled, from $1.4 trillion to $2.7 trillion between early 2020 and mid-2022, making it the dominant buyer in the agency mortgage market. They compressed a decade of price growth into 2 years. Powell's own admission years later, with the clarity of hindsight, we could have, and perhaps should have, stopped asset purchases sooner. And this time, there wasn't even a crash to trigger it. This time, the Fed inflated the bubble on purpose and created a trap that nobody can escape. March 15, 2020. The Fed cuts rates to 0, announces uncapped MBS purchases. The 30-year mortgage hits an all-time low, 2.65% in January 2021. The Fed maintains $40 billion a month in MBS purchases through October 2021. Home prices? Up 18% in 2020 to 21, another 11% in 2021 to 22. Peak annual increase, 19.3% in a single year, July 2021. Between 2019 and 2024, prices surged 48%. Incomes? Up 22%. Do the math. The Fed's balance sheet peaked at nearly $9 trillion in May 2022. That's the inflation. But the inflation was only the first half of the trap, because when the Fed finally reversed course, it accidentally created something even worse. March 2022, the Fed starts hiking rates. By July 2023, they've reached 5.25% to 5.5%. Mortgage rates surge from 3% to 7.03% by December 2023. And here's where it gets diabolical. 52.5% of mortgaged homeowners are locked in at rates below 4%. Over 20% are below 3%. You've got a 3% mortgage on a $400 home. That's $1,686 a month. At today's 6.6%, $2,557. An extra $871 every single month. Nobody moves. And they're telling you they won't. 54% of homeowners say there is no mortgage rate at which they'd sell this year. The FHFA calculated that the lock-in prevented 1.33 million sales, a 57% reduction in inventory. But here's the kicker. The lock-in reduced supply so much that it increased prices by 5.7%, more than offsetting the 3.3% decrease from higher rates. The medicine was worse than the disease. Existing home sales collapsed, from 6.12 million in 2021 to 4.06 million in 2024, the lowest since 1995, despite 6 million more jobs in the economy. So now you have a frozen market. Sellers can't move, buyers can't enter. But none of that explains why nobody in Washington will do anything about it. And this is the part that makes everything else feel almost rational by comparison. The median first-time homebuyer age went from 28 in 1991 to 40 in 2025. Homeownership pushed back 12 years. First-time buyer share? Just 21%, an all-time record low. The average home buyer is now 56 years old. At age 30, millennials trail boomers by 15 percentage points in home ownership. Americans over 55 control approximately 72% of the nation's wealth. Under 40? About 7%. So who has the political power to fix this? Nobody who wants to keep their job. Here's the arithmetic. 65% of Americans are homeowners. They vote at 71.4% turnout. Renters? 55%. Renters make up 34.9% of the population, but only 24% of voters. And don't think this is a partisan issue. Democrats didn't fix it either. They couldn't. 65% of their voters own homes too. This isn't a partisan failure, it's a structural one. Both parties are trapped by the same math. Buying a home literally makes you vote more, especially when zoning is on the ballot. In California, 95.8% of residential land is zoned single-family only. The national housing shortage stands at 3.78 million homes. In Rowland Heights, California, 360 homes, including 82 affordable units, were blocked by neighbors citing neighborhood character. Build more? Takes decades. NIMBYs block it. Current pace won't close the 3.78 million gap. Drop rates. Prices immediately surge again. 2020 proved that. Drop prices? That would wipe $16.5 trillion in housing equity. 4 times worse than 2008. And here's the contrast that makes it sting. Japan treats homes as depreciating assets. They lose half their value in 10 years. Only 14.5% of Japanese housing transactions are resale versus 81% in the U.S. Japan has 12 national zoning codes. The U.S. has over 22,000 local governments, each writing their own. Japan builds 5 times more housing per capita than California, and housing there is affordable. But Americans can't follow this model, because 86 million homeowners' retirement plans depend on prices going up. Would Americans accept watching their biggest investment lose half its value every decade? Spoiler, we already know the answer, and we'll come back to it. So what happens when a $55 trillion asset class becomes too expensive to buy, too valuable to let fall, and too broken to fix? You're looking at it, and the math says it can only get worse. For housing to return to the historical 3.5 times affordability ratio, one of 3 things has to happen. Door 1. Incomes rise 56%. That's a 40-year wait at current growth, if nothing else changes. Door 2. Rates drop back to 2.65%. That requires a crisis worse than COVID. Door 3. Prices crash 30%, from $405,300 to roughly $284,000. And door 3 is where it gets really dark. A 30% correction would erase $16.5 trillion in housing wealth, 4 times the destruction of 2008. The wealth effect alone, every $100 lost in housing wealth reduces consumer spending by about $6, means a $16.5 trillion loss translates to roughly $990 billion in vanished annual spending. That's not a recession, that's a depression. Meanwhile, Americans are already using their homes as ATMs. Total tappable home equity, $11.5 trillion. $25 billion tapped in the first quarter of 2025 alone. And 39% of it goes to debt consolidation. People are already stressed. Timothy Ham, 40 years old, veteran, network security engineer in Michigan. He tried to buy a home in Grand Rapids with a VA loan, the same program created in 1944 to make homeownership possible for veterans. Budget, around $100,000. The only places he could find were, his word, uninhabitable. A veteran with a government-backed loan can't afford a livable home in mid-tier Michigan. He had to leave his hometown. Kelly Deere, 31 years old, Denver, started with a $600,000 budget, ended up paying $789,000, raiding her retirement savings to close the deal. One 28-year-old made 15 offers, went $65,000 over asking, and still got rejected. The market is, and I quote, a slap in the face. Remember those 22.6 million cost-burdened renters? 12.1 million of them are spending more than half their income just on housing. Remember Jonathan Ochart? He's 33 now, still renting. He deleted the Zillow app 6 months ago, stopped running the numbers, because running the numbers just hurts. JP Morgan projects 0% home price growth nationally in 2026, but also no correction. Prices stalling doesn't help. They'd need to fall 30% to be affordable, and nobody will let that happen. The mortgage interest deduction costs the government approximately $30 billion a year, and when the TCJA expires, it's projected to more than double to over $80 billion. 77% of those benefits go to households earning $100,000 or more. The tax code subsidizes wealth for the wealthy. In California, Prop 13 locks property taxes at 1978 levels. Heirs inherit the low base. California has lost over $1 trillion in revenue since 1978. So the trap is complete. Prices can't go up without locking out more people. Prices can't go down without destroying the economy. And nobody, not the Fed, not Congress, not either party, will risk fixing it. But here's the part nobody talks about. The 2008 crash created 4 million victims, families who lost everything. But the survivors? The 86 million households who kept their homes? They became the gatekeepers. They vote at 71% turnout. Renters? 55%. They show up to every zoning meeting. They fight every apartment building. They elect politicians who protect their property values. They are the reason nothing changes. And they're not evil. They're rational. Their retirement depends on home prices going up. Their kids' college fund is their home equity. Their financial security is the system that locks everyone else out. Earlier I said we already knew the answer to whether Americans would accept watching their homes lose half their value like Japan. Here it is. 54% of homeowners say there is no mortgage rate at which they'd sell. They would rather stay locked in their golden cages than let the market breathe. The answer is no, and that's why nobody will fix this. The American dream didn't die. It was pulled up behind those who already got in. And this isn't just America's problem anymore. For the first time in Demographia's 21-year history, not a single major housing market on Earth qualifies as affordable. Not one. 95 markets across 8 nations. Sydney at 13.8 times income. Vancouver at 11.8. London worse than its pre-2008 bubble. The American dream of homeownership was the greatest wealth-building machine in history. And now it's the greatest wealth-hoarding machine in history. The only difference is which side of the door you're on. And if you haven't seen our deep dive into how Israel built a $500 billion economy on permanent crisis and why that fortress is cracking, check it out. Links on screen. If this is your first time here and you want to understand the hidden mechanics behind the global economy, subscribe. Now I want to hear from you. Drop your prediction in the comments. Does America fix its housing market in the next decade? Or is this permanent? Let me know.